There are signatures that seal fates, some written in haste, some in blood, and some so utterly forgotten the world no longer remembers the hand that held the quill, but the chronicle remembers. Beneath the soot-stained archives of London in the year 1847, a man named Alton Greaves vanished without a trace. His name erased, his shadow devoured, but before the world lost him entirely, he left behind one final entry, a contract, still unsigned, or perhaps still signing. Let me show you the page where his story once began, and where yours might end. In the year 1847, deep beneath a soot-streaked clerical hall in Bloomsbury, there existed a vault known only to the record-keepers and the dust. It was not a grand chamber, nor particularly secure. Just a stone-walled warren of metal cabinets, yellowing folders, and silence thick as molasses. The air hung damp and stale, trapped for decades beneath the city's weight, carrying the faint scent of mildew and rusting metal. Alton Greaves, junior archivist, liked it that way. Silence never argued. Files never changed their minds. Paper had rules. Paper could be trusted. At 32, his life had settled into comfortable predictability, each day an echo of the one before. He arrived at precisely 7:30 each morning, lit the same 3 lamps in the same order, and took his tea, never coffee, at his small desk beside the eastern wall. His colleagues found him peculiar, with his meticulously trimmed whiskers and tendency to mutter record numbers under his breath. They called him the ghost behind his back, always present, never quite noticed. Until the day it couldn't be ignored. He had been indexing by lantern light, his fingers stained with ink and dust, copying the same looped script from a civil registry. The yellow flame cast trembling shadows across the stone walls. Ravenscroft Burial Records, 1831 to 1839. Mind-numbing work, but necessary. His eyes burned from the strain, muscles in his hand cramping as he transcribed name after name into the master ledger. That's when the drawer caught his eye. Z null. No such drawer existed. He knew every cabinet in the chamber, had memorized the organization system during his first month of employment. Z ended with 8. There was no Z null. And yet, there it was. Sitting between drawers, Z6 and Z7 like a missing tooth that had regrown, its brass label gleaming despite the patina of age on all the others. He stared at it far longer than he should have, hand trembling slightly as he slid it open. The metal rasped against metal with a sound like something awakening. Inside was only a single folder, tied shut with twine so old it crumbled to the touch. No dust, though. Not a speck. The contract within was pristine. Ink so dark it gleamed like oil. Parchment stiff and fine, as if pressed from flesh rather than wood pulp. No heading, no recipient, just a blank body, and at the bottom a name, or something pretending to be a name. It was not signed by anyone so much as it had signed itself. A long looping script that shifted slightly whenever Alton looked away, then back. He felt a strange nausea bloom behind his eyes, a dull pressure in the base of his skull. His mouth tasted of copper. The signature seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, curves and lines breathing in rhythm with his lungs. When he squinted, he could almost see tiny figures moving within the ink strokes, like microscopic swimmers in a black sea. He placed the contract back into the drawer, tied the twine again with shaking fingers, closed the cabinet. It would be gone tomorrow. Surely. Just a trick of the light, a momentary hallucination from too many hours in the dim archive. Perhaps he was falling ill. Yes, that must be it. As he climbed the stone steps back to the world above, Alton could not shake the feeling that something was climbing with him, clinging to his shadow, riding it like a coach. But the drawer was not gone the next morning. And worse, when he rechecked the folder, he found a second document tucked beneath the first. A copy of the original contract, rewritten in his own handwriting. Alton reeled back, nearly upending his lamp. The letters were unmistakably his, tight, careful, slanted left from years of transcribing. Even the small ink blot on the R, a flaw he'd had since school when Sister Agnes had struck his knuckles for blotting his copybooks. His own peculiar method of crossing his T's with a slight downward curve, the slight pressure indentation on the left margin where his thumb always rested. Yet he had no memory of writing it. His breakfast of dry toast and weak tea churned in his stomach. Had he walked in his sleep, done this in some fugue state? He had read of such things happening to men who worked too long in isolation, perhaps the damp air, the constant dim light. His father had suffered delusions in his later years. Was this hereditary madness beginning to bloom? He asked Edwin, the senior archivist, whether anyone had tampered with the Z section. Edwin, a corpulent man with perpetually fogged spectacles and breath that reeked of pickled onions, frowned. Z null? That's not a drawer, lad. His jowls quivered with amusement. You've been at those records too long. Take the afternoon, clear your head. But when Alton returned to show him, it was there again, as if it had never left, as if it had always been there. Edwin couldn't see it. His pudgy fingers passed right over the brass label, eyes sliding from Z6 to Z7 without pause. See, he said with patronizing patience, Z6, Z7, no null here. Only Alton could see it. Only he could touch it. That night, as he was leaving the hall, a man stood by the entrance in a long grey coat, thin as a dying tree, pale but not sickly, untouched, like marble. His skin had no pores, no imperfections. His eyes were colourless. Not grey or blue, but the absence of colour, like water with nothing to reflect. He smiled when Alton passed. Teeth too white, too even, too many. You found it, the man said softly. His voice barely disturbed the air between them, yet Alton heard it perfectly, as if it originated inside his own skull. Alton blinked. Found what? My signature, the man replied. You kept it safe. Thank you. Alton's skin prickled. The hair on his arms stood rigid beneath his coat sleeves. I don't know what you're talking about. The man tilted his head. The movement was wrong, too fluid, as if his neck contained no bones. Don't you? A pause. If I don't exist, he said, how did you know to lie? The man's shadow stretched long behind him in the gaslight, moving slightly out of sync with its owner. And as Alton hurried away into the London night, he could have sworn the shadow turned to watch him go. That night, Alton dreamed of drawers opening endlessly, each containing only his name, written in progressively shakier handwriting, until the final drawer held nothing but a smear of black that leaked from the page and onto his hands, spreading up his arms like living tattoos. He woke choking on his own screams, the bed linens twisted around him like burial shrouds. The next day, Alton was not listed on the work schedule. His desk was cleared, not a trace of his meticulous filing system or the half-eaten tin of peppermints he kept in the corner drawer. Edwin didn't remember hiring a man named Alton Greaves. You must be mistaken, he said kindly, yet firmly, brow furrowed at the intruder before him. We've had no new staff in months. Security, he made to call for the porter. "But I've worked here for 7 years," Alton protested, panic rising like floodwater in his chest. "Sir, you hired me yourself. You congratulated me on my organisation of the parish records last quarter. You gave me a Christmas bonus, for God's sake." Edwin's face hardened. "I don't know what game you're playing, sir, but I suggest you leave before I'm forced to summon the police." Behind Edwin, in the glass pane of a picture frame, Alton could see the grey-coated man standing where no one stood in the actual room, watching with that same patient, terrible smile. His own landlord, a sharp-nosed widow named Miss Carruth, greeted him with suspicion that evening when he returned to his lodgings on Marylebone Lane. "This is my house," she snapped through a crack in the door, chain firmly in place, "and I don't take boarders." "But I've lived here 3 years," he said, desperation making his voice crack. "You gave me the attic flat. I pay 14 shillings a month, always on time. I fixed your leaking roof last winter." She stared at him, eyes narrowing to suspicious slits. "That room's been locked since my husband passed. 10 years now." Her hand disappeared briefly behind the door and reappeared holding a small pistol. "Leave before I demonstrate what the late Captain Carruth taught me about defence." Alton fled before the constable could be summoned. As he stumbled through the fog-choked alleys of London, he passed gas lamps that flickered out behind him. Windows darkened. Names on signs seemed to blur, letters rearranging themselves when he looked away. The city itself was forgetting him. By midnight, with nowhere else to go, he returned to the archives. The door that should have been locked swung open at his touch, hinges silent as if newly oiled. Z Null was open. Inside, the contract. Now with a 3rd page. This one was written in a different hand, not his, but elegant, inhuman, the letters impossibly precise. It contained only a list of names. His name was the last on the page, but not the first. Dozens came before it, each crossed out with a single stroke. The man in the grey coat stood behind him in the mirror glass of the metal drawer, though Alton hadn't heard the door open, hadn't heard footsteps. "Why me?" Alton whispered, throat dry as paper. The man's voice was softer than dust. "Because you asked to forget." The price of remembering. The man's name was never spoken. He claimed no titles, no station, no origin. But he remembered. And that was the curse. He told Alton that long ago, or perhaps only last week, Alton had stood before the Chronicle, a living book with teeth in its pages and memory for marrow. He had made a trade, a name for a life. To save another, or to be spared, you chose oblivion over consequence. The grey man's fingers traced the edge of the cabinet, leaving no prints, no disturbance of the dust. Memory is the only true currency. The past is not dead. It is merely filed away. But Alton couldn't remember who, or why, only that it was written. And once written, the Chronicle does not erase, only the world does. "Who was it?" Alton demanded, his voice echoing strangely in the archive that had once been so familiar. "Who did I save? My father? A lover? Tell me." The grey man simply smiled. "The truly forgotten cannot be named, even by me." Alton seized the man's coat lapels. His fingers sank into the fabric as if it were liquid, coming away stained with something darker than shadows. "If you took my life, my identity—" "What am I now?" Alton whispered. The grey man's smile widened. A vacancy, a possibility. His eyes flickered like distant candles. An opening. Alton pleaded for an answer, for proof. The man gave him silence, and in the silence, Alton began to feel it. The hollowness, the thinning of his own substance. He could see through his hands, not quite transparent, but less than solid, less than real. He seized the contract and fled. He thought perhaps fire could undo what ink had done. He lit the last candle in the archive, laid the contract on the floor. His hands were more transparent now, the outline of his fingers blurring at the edges like watercolours left in rain. He no longer casts a shadow. He struck a match. The parchment did not burn. It blistered. Ink swelled from the signature, bleeding up through the paper, then across the stone floor, pulsing, living, spiralling in looping symbols and names that were not names. It formed patterns, ancient and forbidden. Sigils that predated language itself. The candle guttered, and then extinguished. Darkness swallowed the room, but Alton could still see. In the centre of the contract, his name began to unravel. Alton. Then his surname, letter by letter. Greaves. Each letter lifted from the page, hovering in the air before him, glowing with an inner light as if illuminated from within by some eldritch flame. The parchment curled inward. The ink faded. The chronicle closed. And in its place stood the grey man, but no longer thin, no longer merely watching. He had grown massive, his coat now a flowing cloak of shadows, his face still smiling, still patient, but now with a hunger that had never been concealed, merely waiting. "The contract is fulfilled," he said, and reached for what remained of Alton Greaves. Alton tried to scream, but found he had no voice, no breath, no lungs. The last thing he saw was his own name, floating away letter by letter, each one falling into the grey man's outstretched palm like a coin, like payment. The next morning, a new junior archivist arrived at the Bloomsbury archives. His name was Arden Thorne, and he was known for his meticulous work, for his love of order, for his trust in paper. He found a drawer labelled Z-Null almost immediately. Inside was a single folder and a contract, freshly signed. There are signatures that seal fates, some written in haste, some in blood, and some, so utterly forgotten, the world no longer remembers the hand that held the quill, but the chronicle remembers. Beneath the soot-stained archives of London in the year 1847, a man named Alton Greaves vanished without a trace. His name erased, his shadow devoured, but before the world lost him entirely, he left behind one final entry, a contract, still unsigned, or perhaps still signing. Let me show you the page where his story once began, and where yours might end.